must have gone further into orbit than I thought.
What happened to the stars who once made the world believe in magic? Once upon a time, on analog television, in black and white living rooms across America, there was a show where love was bottled, wishes were granted, and every problem could vanish with a blink. I Dream of Jeannie was more than just a sitcom. It was a cinematic escape dressed in laugh tracks and pastel costumes. A dream conjured each week by a blonde genie and her bewildered astronaut. But no magic lasts forever. As the decades passed, the colors faded. The cast that once danced across the screen, bright, youthful, and full of mischief, grew older and one by one disappeared. Behind the charm were real people, wounded, brilliant, secretive. Some died in silence. Others were devoured by their own demons. And a few held on, quietly guarding what remained of that enchanted world. Today, we return not just to remember, but to rediscover. In this video, we trace the lives and deaths of 6 actors from I Dream of Jeannie, uncovering the fame that changed them, the pain they carried, and the moments that defined and ended their time in Hollywood. If these faces ever lit up your screen, subscribe to this channel. Because we don't just tell stories. We give voice to those the camera no longer sees. Larry Hagman, Colonel Tony Nelson. He was the face of American optimism, a clean-cut astronaut with a boyish grin, falling headfirst into magic, mischief, and love. As Colonel Tony Nelson in I Dream of Jeannie, Larry Hagman became a household name. But behind that disarming smile was a man navigating shadows far deeper than what the sitcom ever revealed. Born in Fort Worth, Texas, Hagman was the only son of Broadway legend Mary Martin. His childhood was fractured, parents divorced early, homes changed often. He served in the Air Force, a foreshadowing of the role that would define him. But acting ran in his blood, and after a series of stage roles and TV appearances, Jeannie landed in his lap in 1965. He was 34. On screen, he was charming, bemused, the eternal straight man to a genie's chaos. Off-screen, it wasn't always so light. Hagman reportedly had a tense relationship with the show's producers and felt artistically stifled by its squeaky clean tone. Co-star Barbara Eden would later recall how unpredictable, and sometimes worrying, his behavior could be. What few fans knew then was that Hagman had begun drinking heavily. For years, the pressure of fame and the search for control led him into a battle with alcohol that nearly claimed his life. When Jeannie ended, Hagman didn't disappear, he detonated. In 1978, he redefined himself as the cunning oil baron J.R. Ewing in Dallas, and America couldn't look away. Who Shot J.R. became a global obsession. He became one of TV's highest-paid actors, and leaned into the infamy with glee. But behind the scenes, years of drinking were quietly doing their damage. By 1995, doctors diagnosed him with cirrhosis, and he underwent a 16-hour liver transplant surgery, a desperate bid to save his life. Years of strong drinking, the medical notes said. Hagman never denied it. He survived, and in true Hagman fashion, he returned to work. He championed organ donation, served as a national spokesperson for transplant awareness, and reprised his role in the Dallas reboot. Even weakened, even changed, he refused to go quietly. He died in Dallas, fittingly. His ashes later scattered at South Fork Ranch, the fictional home of J.R. Ewing. 2 personas, 2 legacies, one beloved, one feared. And between them, the real Larry Hagman, flawed, brilliant, unforgettable. Bill Daly, Major Roger Healy. He was the heartbeat of chaos, the sidekick who made mischief feel innocent, the comic foil who never needed the spotlight to steal a scene. As Major Roger Healy, Bill Daly didn't just support the magic in I Dream of Jeannie, he grounded it. While Jeannie blinked and Tony panicked, Roger delighted in the absurd, often creating more trouble than the genie herself. But beneath the stammering charm and sitcom timing was a man whose real life followed a far quieter, more fragile script. Born in Des Moines, Iowa, Bill Daly didn't set out to be an actor. He began as a musician, playing bass and jazz combos before being drafted into the Korean War. He served in an artillery unit, performing music alongside accordionist Dick Contino for fellow troops, his first taste of entertaining under pressure. After the war, he studied acting at the Goodman Theater in Chicago, then worked as a TV announcer and comedy writer before trying stand-up. He was funny, unpolished, and oddly endearing. In the early 60s, Sidney Sheldon spotted him in a small role on Bewitched and cast him as Roger Healy, a role originally meant for someone else. Daly brought the character to life with nervous energy and impeccable timing. His Roger wasn't just comic relief. He was the audience's entry point into the chaos of Jeannie's world. Behind the scenes, he remained humble, grateful, and deeply loyal to his castmates. Eden later described him as the kindest man on set. He never raised his voice. Not once. But as the show ended, so did his time in the spotlight. He found renewed success in the 1970s as the bumbling neighbor Howard Borden in The Bob Newhart Show, another 6-season run that cemented him as one of TV's most beloved supporting actors. Yet fame never consumed him. He preferred smaller stages, magic shows for children, writing jokes for others. Fame, for Bill, was never the point. His personal life, though less public, carried its own weight. He married 3 times and adopted 2 children, enduring the loss of his second wife, Rebecca, in 2010. In his later years, he rarely gave interviews. He attended Jeannie reunions, but mostly stayed out of the Hollywood circuit. He passed away peacefully in Santa Fe, just 5 days after his 91st birthday. Bill Daly wasn't flashy. He wasn't scandalous. He was steady, warm, and quietly essential. In a world of blinking genies and over-the-top villains, he was the ordinary man caught in the extraordinary, and perhaps that's what made him magic. Hayden Ror, Dr. Alfred Bellows. He was the man who knew something was wrong, but could never quite prove it. As Dr. Alfred Bellows, the perpetually suspicious NASA psychiatrist in I Dream of Jeannie, Hayden Ror became the comedic backbone of the show's absurdity. Every strange event had one victim, his sanity. And in that role, rolling his eyes, twitching with doubt, pacing as logic collapsed around him, Rourke didn't just play a straight man. He embodied the slow unraveling of reason in a world ruled by magic. Born William Henry Rourke Jr. in Brooklyn in 1910, he was the son of Margaret Hayden Rourke, a costume designer and socialite. Taking her maiden name as his stage name, Hayden pursued acting seriously, studying theater and rising steadily through the ranks. By the 1950s, he was a familiar presence on both stage and screen, with appearances in An American in Paris, Pillow Talk, The Twilight Zone, and The Love Boat. His characters were often men of order and authority, but he always gave them a hint of vulnerability, something genuine just beneath the surface. When I Dream of Jeannie launched in 1965, Rourke was already a seasoned professional. But as Dr. Bellows, he became unforgettable. His exasperation was artful, his timing impeccable. Every time he walked into a room and caught something impossible, only for it to vanish seconds later, the audience braced for his meltdown. He gave confusion dignity. And somehow, in a show filled with magic, he became the most relatable character of all. Off camera, Rourke was described as warm, witty, and exacting in his craft. He cared deeply about his work and was known as a generous collaborator. While the spotlight never fully found him after Jeannie, he did return for the 1985 reunion film I Dream of Jeannie. 15 years later, giving fans one last dose of bewildered brilliance. He passed away in 1987 at age 76 from multiple myeloma, leaving behind a quiet but indelible legacy. There were no scandals, no bitter tabloid farewells. Just a long career, a respected name, and a character who, despite never understanding what was really going on, captured the madness of magic better than anyone. Hayden Ror gave us a man on the edge of reason, and in doing so, he reminded us that even disbelief can be deeply human. Barton Mlan, General Martin Peterson. He didn't smile often. He didn't have to. As General Martin Peterson, the no-nonsense commanding officer in I Dream of Jeannie, Barton Mlan brought weight, gravity, and just the right amount of comic rigidity to a world filled with blinking genies and vanishing astronauts. When he barked orders, everyone listened, even if a bottle-bound force of chaos always had other plans. But long before Jeannie, Barton Mlan had already lived half a dozen lifetimes on screen. Born in South Carolina on Christmas Day, 1902, Mlan wasn't destined for a life of whimsy. He was a college football star at Wesleyan University and a classically trained actor from the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. His rugged build, sharp features, and gravel-lined voice made him an instant fit for early Hollywood's grittiest roles. From the 1930s through the 1950s, he played gangsters, crooked cops, hard-boiled detectives, and outlaws. If someone needed to get punched, or do the punching, Mlan was your man. He was a studio regular at Warner Brothers, appearing alongside stars like Humphrey Bogart and James Cagney in films such as The Maltese Falcon, G-Men, and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. He was never the hero. He was something better, the guy who made the hero look convincing. But the grind of B-movie typecasting eventually gave way to something more interesting in television. In the 1960s, as older tough guy roles began to fade, Mlan embraced the small screen with surprising grace. I Dream of Jeannie gave him a second life. As a figure of authority trying to maintain sanity while the impossible unfolded daily under his command. Off camera, Mlan was married to actress Charlotte Winters. They shared not just a home, but a life in the truest sense, starring in several films together and retreating to their 2,000-acre cattle ranch in California when the cameras stopped rolling. He was, by all accounts, as grounded in real life as his characters appeared on screen. Then, just as Jeannie was hitting its stride, tragedy struck. Mlan passed away on January 1st, 1969, from double pneumonia. His sudden death forced the show to write out General Peterson and replace him with a new character, General Schaefer, played by Vincent Hayworth. Mclane's exit was abrupt, quiet, and in keeping with his career. He never asked for fanfare. He simply showed up, delivered with force, and vanished, like a punchline with a steel jaw. Vincent Hayworth, General Winfield Schaefer. When Barton Mlan passed away in the middle of I Dream of Jeannie's run, the show needed someone who could fill the void, an actor who could command respect, deliver authority, and still play ball in a world where anything could, and often did, go wrong. They found him in Vincent Hayworth, a veteran character actor with a commanding voice, a glint of mischief, and a long resume hidden in plain sight. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1906, Hayworth had been around Hollywood long before most audiences realized. He started on radio in the 1930s, often using the stage name Jack Arnold, and became a familiar voice to millions of Americans long before he became a familiar face. He acted in dozens of films, played both villains and gentlemen, and appeared on countless television shows throughout the 1950s and 60s. To many casting directors, he was the go-to man for dignified but dangerous types, refined on the surface, with just a hint of menace underneath. But for Jeannie, he softened. As General Winfield Schaefer, Hayworth took over the role of Tony Nelson's commanding officer with less grit and more exasperated charm. His Schaefer wasn't as hard-nosed as Peterson, but he had a temper, a booming voice, and a comic rhythm that made him a perfect fit for the show's increasingly chaotic tone. He wasn't just a replacement. He was a reinvention. Few fans knew that Hayworth was the uncle of screen siren Rita Hayworth, or that he had quietly built a career most actors would envy, stretching across radio, film, television, and the stage. Fewer still knew how eerily his life would intertwine with the end of Jeannie. On May 21, 1970, Hayworth died suddenly of a heart attack at age 63. The final original episode of I Dream of Jeannie aired just 5 days later, on May 26th. He never got to see the series close. There was no goodbye, no tribute, just silence. And maybe that's the most haunting part. He had stepped into a world of fantasy, delivered order to the chaos, and vanished, quietly, like a man closing the last door on a soundstage that would never reopen. For a show built on illusion, his departure felt all too real. Emiline Henry, Amanda Bellows. In a show dominated by magic, military men, and mischief, Emiline Henry brought a very specific kind of chaos, the chaos of suburban propriety. As Amanda Bellows, the doting, suspicious, and delightfully oblivious wife of Dr. Alfred Bellows, she became the perfect comic counterpart to the mayhem around her. She wasn't there to steal scenes, and yet, somehow she did. Born in Philadelphia in 1928, Emiline Henry began her career not in television, but on stage, with a voice trained for musical theater and ambitions shaped by the big screen. She paid her dues in the background of studio comedies and minor film roles, slowly climbing her way into more visible parts. One of her early film credits included Rosemary's Baby, but it was television that would give her a lasting place in pop culture. She first appeared in I Dream of Jeannie not as Amanda, but as a magician's assistant in a one-off guest role. Producers saw something in her: quick timing, expressive eyes, and a perfect balance between elegance and eccentricity. By the second season, she was recast as Amanda Bellows, and suddenly, the world of Jeannie had another layer of comic brilliance. Amanda was curious, nosy, sometimes confused, but never cruel. In a world where the impossible kept happening, she simply smiled, questioned it, and moved on. And in doing so, she made the absurd feel oddly domestic. Emiline's portrayal brought a subtle intelligence to what could have been a flat character. She didn't play Amanda as clueless, but as someone just one step behind the truth. That made her funny. It also made her deeply human. Off-screen, Emiline Henry led a life far from the spotlight. She married actor Mark Roberts in 1969, but the marriage ended a few years later. She had no children. Her career never exploded, but she remained a steady presence on television throughout the 1960s and 70s, appearing in guest roles on shows like The Munsters and The Love Boat. She was reportedly being considered for a recurring role in Three's Company before sudden illness changed everything. In 1979, at the age of just 50, Emiline Henry passed away from brain cancer. There were no headlines, no retrospectives, no public memorial, just silence. But for those who remember Jeannie, she will always be Amanda Bellows, the woman who watched impossible things happen, smiled, and tried her best to understand. And maybe, in her own quiet way, she did. Barbara Eden, Jeannie. She was the magic, the light, the spark in a bottle. In a world of uniforms and order, Barbara Eden floated in like a breeze from another world, playful, powerful, unknowable. As Jeannie, she wasn't just a fantasy, she became a symbol of beauty, of mischief, of a kind of innocence that could outwit generals and charm the toughest men in space. But even genies can't escape gravity. Born Barbara Jean Moorhead in Tucson, Arizona, she studied music before turning to acting. Her early career was steady, not spectacular. A few guest spots, a supporting role opposite Elvis Presley in Flaming Star, and a handful of studio films that never quite knew what to do with her. Then came The Brass Bottle, a light comedy about a man and a genie that inspired Sidney Sheldon to imagine something bigger. He needed someone who could be funny without trying too hard, alluring without being dangerous, and real enough to carry fantasy on her shoulders. He chose Barbara Eden. She was 34 when I Dream of Jeannie first aired. America didn't just fall for the idea, they fell for her. She made Jeannie timeless not by playing her as naive, but as a woman of strength and emotion, bottled inside comedy. For 5 seasons, Eden was the beating heart of a show that made the impossible feel inviting. Yet away from the magic, life would ask her to carry pain far heavier than a genie's bottle. She endured public divorces and private heartbreaks. And in 2001, she suffered the unimaginable, the loss of her only son, Matthew. In interviews, she spoke of the grief as something that never leaves, but also something that deepens her empathy for fans, for others, for the world. Still, she never stopped. From Harper Valley PDA to touring stage musicals, from USO tours in war zones to memoirs and red carpets, Barbara Eden kept performing long after the spotlight moved on. Even into her 90s, she appears at fan conventions with warmth, poise, and that same unmistakable twinkle in her eye. And she is the last one left. The generals, the doctors, the loyal sidekick, they're gone. Only Jeannie remains. Watching, smiling, blinking back the years. She once said, "People don't want the illusion to die." And maybe that's why she's still with us. Because we're not ready to say goodbye. They made us believe in the impossible. With a blink, a bottle, and a burst of laughter, I Dream of Jeannie transported us to a world where logic bent to wonder, where space met fantasy, and where a single smile could stop time. But behind the curtain of comedy, there were lives, rich, complicated, deeply human. Some soared, others faltered. All of them left something behind. Larry Hagman taught us that innocence and darkness can exist in the same man. Bill Daly showed that kindness can echo louder than fame. Hayden Ror mastered the art of quiet brilliance. Emiline Henry turned a small role into something unforgettable. Barton Mlan and Vincent Hayworth brought strength and structure, only to vanish when we least expected. And Barbara Eden, still radiant, remains as the keeper of the flame, a living memory of a world that once blinked into being. These were not just characters. They were people who gave their lives to performance, to laughter, to imagination. They lived their truths behind the fiction, and somewhere along the way, they became part of ours. If these stories moved you, if these faces still bring back something you can't quite name, subscribe to this channel. Because we don't just remember. We tell the stories behind the smiles. The ones that stayed with us. The ones we never got to say goodbye to.